Wednesday edition right on KTN News. I still have Dismas Mak and Wakili Kipchumba with me in studio. Now, Dismas, there's a story that we had promised, a discussion we had promised our viewers just a few minutes ago, and that has everything to do with the International Monetary Fund. I remember some time back they had warned Kenya about the wage bill, saying that it's not sustainable. Now they're warning Kenyans, with regards to the loans that Kenya is receiving from other countries.
Well, we should take the IMF warnings seriously because it's probably the only international body that has got unlimited access to our books. And when they give an opinion, it's an opinion that you cannot ignore. And they've been giving these warnings times above number about our fiscal and monetary management, that we've been making one blunder after the other. And that goes back to President Kenyatta's legacy. The Minister for National Treasury has been there for 6 years. It's because of errors of omission or commission by Rotich that we are where we find ourselves today. And he's still in the cabinet. But he has not given us a solution on how to get out of it. Now, we are told that Kenya has got a huge appetite for commercial debt. You wonder, why go for commercial debt at the expense of concessional debt? You've got so many projects being financed by the national government, by money from commercial debt. But when you want to look at those projects and when you are reviewing them, you get the impression that most of the money disappears into corruption. And indeed, the Auditor General says that for most of these projects, up to a third of the projects funds go to corruption. So are we going to China to get commercial debt to pay for corruption or to finance corruption in Kenya? And those are the pertinent questions we need to ask ourselves. And two things come to play. We must follow the advice of IMF because everybody else across the world, they look at IMF to give them an indication. Like, for instance, they've indicated that our Kenyan currency is being managed, meaning that our central bank is giving our Kenyan shilling an artificial value, because they know that if you let it go to the international market where you have a demand and supply, it's going to lose by 17.5%, and our international debt will go up. And then another question is, why do we have a huge appetite for that external debt? Why can't we even borrow locally? Because right now, up to 50% of our debt is external, meaning that if the shilling fluctuates by a second, we are going to get into deep trouble. Now you've got these MPs, or senators and other leaders talking about 2022 instead of focusing on this issue of IMF and what we are supposed to be doing today to get out of it. And at this, we must give credit to Musalia Mudavadi. He's among the few politicians in Kenya who've been consistent on asking President Kenyatta to go slow on these commercial debts. And he's even covered in the newspapers today. But where are his other colleagues? Where is Raila Odinga to talk about these IMF? I've not heard him say anything. The last I heard of him is somewhere in the US or London, or maybe he's waiting for the KQ flight back. Where is Wetangula? Where is Ruto? Ruto has not spoken about the commercial debt. He's not given it deep attention. Where is Kalonzo Musyoka? Where is even Ekura Aukot? Where are these people who describe themselves as public intellectuals? Some of them are members of the National Assembly. Some of them are in the Senate. Where is the Jubilee Parliamentary Group? Where is the NASA Parliamentary Group? To say that now Kenya, since we've got these huge commercial debts, what are the solutions? How are we going to do it? Because if Kenya defaults once, then we are going to go either in Argentina or it's going to be like the Greek crisis. Where are our leaders to give solutions? Now, that's the big question that you keep on wondering. And even for me, somebody who's read basic economics, I know when you're in this cash flow crisis, you do debt scheduling. I've not heard of Rotich discussing debt scheduling. Nowhere. There's nobody from the National Treasury discussing that. So instead, what are they doing? They're all over, following Ruto, following Raila, following Wetangula, hoping to be given some money, hoping to, they're playing psychophancy at the expense of the nation. And we need to keep on asking ourselves, have we identified our national interest and public interest so that all our leaders are driving in the same direction? And at this stage, we must go back and give Musalia Mudavadi credits. It's even called for handling, because we need to start doing today so that in the next 1 year, it's accepted by the international partners. So we're going to wait till we are in a crisis mode when hell has been loose, and then now we send Rotich to France, and then we send him to London, then we send him to Washington, D.C. These are those pertinent questions that should make every Kenyan nervous who's at the story or go back to where the democracy in Christian. The pertinent questions, what are we doing? We are seated on our hands. We've done a marathon. We'll go back home and hoping for miracles to come from heaven.
Mark, you've had this much there. Can you perhaps contextualize this warning from IMF for our viewers? And bearing in mind that just in 2013, Kenya had a debt of about 1.2 trillion. Now, it's about 5.1 trillion and still counting, because understand that there are a few more trips that, some individuals in the political class are planning to make. And Kenyans' fear is that, these might be trips that will definitely bring some more loans again.
It's not a fear. I don't understand why Kenyans are afraid. It's a fact.
It's a fact.
It's a fact. When you passed a budget which had a deficit, it was obvious that you would have to borrow. You'd have to borrow locally and you'd have to borrow internationally. So let's be very clear as a country that we have debts, we will borrow more. Okay, because we do not have the courage to reduce our budget. We never do. We've never sat down. In fact, I don't remember in living memory whether I've ever had a Minister of Finance saying we have reduced costs in our budget by this amount. Year on year, we keep growing. Now, that being said, what the IMF said is that Kenya's ability to default, to pay, was good. And therefore our default rate was low. It was recently raised to medium. Now what that means is that there is a likelihood that we could be unable to pay back our debt. Now if you look at how the economy is now and how people are behaving, then it is likely that we may not be able to raise enough money. The reason why likely is because of the amount of taxes we've introduced everywhere. There is a higher possibility that people will do tax avoidance. Okay, or legal ways not paying tax. When that happens, the government will not have enough resources to meet recurrent expenditure vis-a-vis paying the debts that we need. Now, there are two scenarios that are possible. One scenario is that we pay our loans and then we don't pay our salaries. Now, if you look at how salaries have delayed and stuff like that, you can see what is going on. What is funny to me is that Dismas has so much hope in a political class whose only reason they were voted for is the ability to say tibim tialala kumira kumira na wembe ni ule ule. If that is the intellectual capacity upon which someone was chosen, it is therefore quite unbelievable that Dismas, you would believe that they have the capacity somehow to come from kumira thinking to, okay, what is the fiscal policy of this country? If I asked you today to tell me what is the Jubilee philosophy around how they are running the economy, you will be remiss to say there is none, because there is no philosophy. The Minister of the Treasury has never told us how exactly he hopes this will work. What happens is every time we complain about debt, we are given the world map and then we are told all these countries have more debts than us. But I will tell you, someone who earns 1 million shillings and has 2 million shillings in debt is not in the same position as someone who earns 10,000 shillings and has 2 million shillings in debt. Kenya is not a net producer country, it's a net consumer country. So our debt in this country is quite different. So we do not know, A, have a philosophy, and B, let me put it this way. I do not like this guy, but I'll give Kenyans an example. David Ndii, when he writes his famous one-sided economic jargon on his Facebook and Twitter and whatever, my concern is not what he writes. My concern is no one in Jubilee has an answer. No one is able to sit with Ndii and say, no, sir, you are wrong. That tells me that the thinking and the philosophy behind our economic model is either, if it is sound only in the CS's head, and it is not sound to the rest of us. There is no one working with 2 feet today in Nairobi or in the entirety of Kenya who can explain to you how the CS of the Treasury expects to be able to survive this thing. And that is the biggest danger. Danger number 2, listen, there is no one who has proven to me that they have the competence to handle our economy, not in the Treasury, not in Parliament, not in Senate, because the quality of discussions, listen, if you have that much debt, 5.1 trillion, what time do you have to ask a woman why she's showing her arms in Parliament? How are her arms going to affect the price of unga? If we cannot, listen, if our national reserve for cereal is about to lose 5 billion in value because of the current maize price, and on top of that lose another 1.7 billion of rotten maize. If we cannot store maize successfully as a country, how are we going to run our economy? Surely.
Kip, you've had Mark speaking about the 5.1 trillion debt debate aside. There's another question that people are asking. Are we putting proper use of this money that
bad conception that has been forced to us over time. Borrowing is not a bad thing. Actually, it is a proper way of calculated growth. In absence of you borrowing money, you will steal. If today you are building a house and you have not taken a loan, and we know your salary is 10,000, I'm not saying it is, we will know from our mind that either you are money laundering or either one of your grandfathers took a whole county of our land and you are harvesting something there. Those are the only options. But now back to our national debt, the discourse on national debt. It is appalling that we discuss about national debt and we do not want to discuss about the people who steal our money, the people who pilfer this money when it comes. Borrowing is not an issue. I am a believer and I am a perpetual optimist. There is a limit, of course.
Sort of a ceiling.
Even eating is not a bad thing, but you are not supposed to eat everything in one day.
Don't you think that's the situation?
The situation that we are in, we find ourselves in a situation whereby we want to allow KRA to run away without meeting its targets for 4 years continuously. And what do we do in absence of meeting targets? We go and borrow in China. Instead of addressing our leakages in the taxation model we have embraced as a nation, we are curing the weaknesses of taxation.
Does that show failure in the government?
It is, of course, a failure because for us not to achieve our targets in terms of tax targets, we only have to look at 3 institutions: Parliament, Kenya Revenue Authority, and KEBS, because it is through their hands that this money will come. Parliament, why? We have a parliament where their growth and their depth in terms of intellectual depth is in shouting instead of thinking. Anybody expect that a parliament where they have 3 roles, legislate, represent, and oversight, they should spend much of their time in thinking and in thinking growth. Look at it this way, we have no budget for our library in Parliament. Where do our parliamentarians get ideas? That is my question. We have not funded Facebook for them to be getting ideas there.
More than 38 billion.
Yes, they are interested in a gym, food, and the things that matter least in our national cycle. But come back to the issue of our debt. Look at it this way, there are things that we have not embraced. We do not know whether we have a debt management policy, and why is it not being made public? Secondly, we do not know with certainty when we borrow these funds. We do not know whether the mwananchi will get the value. Yes, I know we'll talk about the SGR and everything, but do we get the value that we borrowed it? And the other thing, at times I take IMF with a lot of pinch, because when you have read international geopolitics, you understand that IMF is pro-West. And when you are leaning to China...
back to the imperialistic
Yes, movement. When you are leaning to China, they will come up with spin. But that is not to say that I do not look at how things are now. The other danger that we feel we are falling for as a country is we developed PR on or spin on debt, and we are now consuming the speed instead of using it to make sure that it is just a counter mechanism, but it should not be the way out. The other thing is, why aren't we rescheduling our debts? You know, you can go and discuss with whoever gave us the money, tell them, look, our economy is not growing because of these factors, but we can do this. The other thing, our budget, there are things that we should not be having in our budget annually. Look at the office and maintenance, O&M. Every parastatal has a budget for a new printer. Do we need a printer annually? No. A lifespan of a printer is 3 years. Why do we budget for a printer annually? Secondly, and the last point I'm about to make, why should we allow our budget to grow in a rate not consistent with our national GDP growth? Because that is where the question is. You know, you cannot be consuming 100,000 and you earn 50,000. I mean, you have to have a proportional way of spending your money.
Yes, and that's why, once again, people are raising question with regards to not just the debt, but if Kenya and the government, that is making proper use of this money that they're borrowing from outside there. Dismas, I think you had a burning issue.
It's actually three issues. And Kipchumba has spoken about IMF being an imperialist body. It's a statement of fact that IMF does not come to Kenya on their own motion. That they were going to Uganda, then they said, let's pass by Kenya. They come here on invitation. They're invited to come to Kenya.
By the host country.
Yeah. It's because we've been unable to manage our economics. That's why they come to Kenya. So they're not saying, by the way, I was on my way to Kigali, let me stop over and look at your books. No, they come to Kenya because either Jubilee Economics has failed, or Uhuru Economics has failed, or Root Economics has failed. So we don't know which is which. But at the end of the day, what concerns Mura back in my village is there a future for Kenya? Are we going the Argentinian way? Is there going to be a crisis? And if there's going to be a crisis, is the government inspiring confidence? If we're in a more mature economy where the National Treasury boss respects Wanjiku, before even IMF gave that statement, before they made it public, the National Treasury would have been in a crisis mode to try and sort out this mess. Because you see, our international players are looking at IMF and keeping watch. And they're just waiting for signals and signals and more signals. Any slightest hitch, we are going to get into trouble. So at the end of the day, in as much as we say that the MPs do not make sense, they're the ones who have leadership for the next 4 years. So I don't know whether Mark wants now Jubilee to have Dr. David Indi as a nominated member of the National Assembly or Senate, or as an advisor at State House or at the National Treasury to infuse those ideas. And another question is, I don't know why parts of Jubilee have got a serious allergy to solid advice. Because in my view, David Indi means well for Kenya. I mean, it doesn't say this because he went to Oxford or maybe because he used to advise Raila Odinga. It means well for Kenya. Why can't you have somebody like David Indi invited for an intellectual intercourse at the State House, at the National Treasury, so that you get like-minded people to beat these ideas and give us a solution? Because if you don't do this, Kenya is going to degenerate, and very soon we are going to become will be a laughing stock in the region.
Mark, how serious is this warning, perhaps?
Let me tell you, there's this idea that one day Kenya will grow up. You know, we say this in a mature democracy, in a mature economy. Listen, economics is economics. Okay? It works in your house, it works in the continent, it works in Europe, it works everywhere. Okay? If you're going to borrow money, you better have a plan. And that money you've borrowed better go into the plan. And that plan better produce what is needed for you to pay back. That's simple borrowing. That is, you don't need to go to school. Even when you were in high school, when you borrowed 5 shillings from your friend, you knew how to pay back. Kipchumba has talked about something interesting. KRA has failed to meet its target year on year. What have we done about it? Our tax bracket is a paltry 3 million people. What are we doing about it? Our corruption is run away, my friend. Every day you read the paper, there is a Savula, there is a Juhu, there's a who being
600
arrested.
B every year.
600 billion every year is lost. What are we doing to deal with all of these things? You cannot say that I'm a professional water carrier, but see how many holes my bucket has. That's the problem with Kenya. And the problem also is that we do not have this sense of urgency, this sense of now, when it comes to national issues. In fact, to the average Kenyan mind, 2022 is such an emergency as opposed to right now, as opposed to this very moment in time where businessmen are saying they cannot borrow because they've been locked out by government. These are the issues that we need to address. So the solutions are simple. They're very simple. Number one, the minister in charge of the Treasury, needs to tell Kenyans what is his plan, not what is his budget. That's always the mistake. What is the plan of austerity measures, okay? And, you know, austerity can be very common sense. For example, travel, reducing those to 4 people. I don't know why it took long, but that's a very common sense approach. Just like the same way, dear parliamentarians, MCAs, senators, and other government officials, when you go on a trip, write a report. Even a class 3 student knows this. We don't need to tell you this in national TV, but since you don't listen, please write a report so we can know. You need to talk about things like recurrent expenditure in offices. We bought 10 pens last week, so we must buy 10 pens again. We must buy flowers. We must buy carpet. Someone told me that flowers and tea cost us over 1 billion shillings. You might say 1 billion is little compared to 3 trillion, but kidogo kidogo jaza kibaba. We must start by making small austerity measures that begin to save this country money. Can he tell us how he's going to have a balanced budget for once? A budget that is not balanced in terms of expenditure and what we will borrow, but balanced in the sense that this is what we expect to receive from KRA and this is what I've budgeted for. Can he deliver that? Then can he tell us over the next 4 years how he's going to manage that debt and how it's going to impact 50 years from now? This idea that our leaders think they rule 5 years at a time is nonsensical. You rule 10, 50 years ahead of time because these debts are 50 years ahead of time. So tell us, generation 2045, how will they be dealing with this debt? That is your responsibility, Minister Rotich. That's what they should deliver to Kenyans.
And I think, Kipchumba, you want to react to that as much as you're going to react to Mark's point of view. Don't you think the silence from the Treasury CS is a bit too loud with all these developments happening?
What is questionable is not his silence. What is questionable is that his former employer is the one raising questions. That is where, at times, I do not get enough spine in my mind to negotiate the two. That your former employer can say this and you are not speaking. We will expect that because he is an ex-IMF and the PS is ex-IMF, they will be in a sync as they communicate. Because at least, and these are highly trained and highly motivated individuals, when at times you wonder why things go wrong. When you have been in charge of macroeconomics is to say that you have been in charge of the big things. And you can now not get us in the right place. It leaves a lot of questions. But there is something this man has said and has managed to convince the show that it is the right thing. There is this idea that this mass over time has held that Mudavadi is the salvation of everything. I want to tell this mass that Mudavadi is the reason why we are where we are. We must violently attack the thinking that Mudavadi is among the reasons that we can move forward as a nation. He's one of the people who talks in a very lousy manner. He does not have a spine to even bring 500 people for a demonstration to stand for his idea.
We're going to miss the bigger picture, which is our debt.
This nation cannot be salvaged by people addressing press conferences. Our tax problem, our debt problem ought not to be there. We ought not to even be taking debt. Look at it this way. We have 15 trillion stashed in foreign accounts. We lose 600 billion annually in our budget. Why do you need debt? Fix those ones, bring even 10 trillion, and we become a first world country. Why?
Dismas, let me give you the last word as you react to Kip's point of view there.
No, I don't want to react to that point of view, but I want to talk about the figure you said, the amount of money we lose. That we lose up to 600 billion annually on corruption. That is enough money to finance Rwanda's budgets for 2.5 years.
Oh my goodness.
So that's the point I wanted to bring. That Rwanda's budget, depending on the exchange rate, is Kenya shillings 258 billion. So effectively, the money that we lose annually can finance Rwanda for 2 years. Now, what happens when you go to Rwanda? When you go to Kigali, they've got a very clean city. When you go to Kigali, they've got a very clean police. They've got a very clean military. In as much as there is no freedom of speech, you can't say things as you may want to, and you know, Kagame is accused of stepping on human rights. But for people who've been there, they say outside human rights, actually the budget works.
Money is put into proper use.
money is put into the right place. So now we need to ask ourselves, if we can allow selected public servants, cartels and special interests to steal money which can run Rwanda for 2.5 years, what are we telling Kenyans?
And you know,
Yes, Mark, I think we're going to continue with this discussion. And I see a lot of Kenyans who are, of course, putting their suggestion on social media, especially Twitter. I'm going to go through some of their feedback shortly. But for now, let me take a very short break. But still to come, we're going to tell you why 7 lawmakers from Bomet County walked out of President Uhuru Kenyatta at a function in Bomet. We'll have that after this short break right here on